It is now officially 1 year until the FNAF 2 movie's release. We have been fed with plenty of information, behind the scenes and teasers that have been hyping up the movie really well. So in this video, I just kind of wanted to discuss what I personally want to see in this next movie. Now, I'm not going to cover everything in this one video because there's a lot to go through. I'm mainly going to focus on the things I want the most, which is basically stuff about the story and the plot and the direction we're going to go with these new movies and how they're going to link it back to the game. Of course, if you would like to see me make more videos analyzing and breaking down what I want for the FNAF 2 movie, then just let me know in the comments section. So, first thing I want to discuss is about how the movie is going to be a sequel. Now just hear me out here, this isn't a complaint. So we all know that in the FNAF game universe, that FNAF 2 is a prequel where it takes place before the first game. But for this story, they're obviously not going to do that, and it's going to be a continuous story from one film to the other. Now I'd just like to mention, I haven't read up much information online, so I don't really know much about what's going on. I've seen some pictures, I've heard some statements, but that's it. So if I'm just repeating stuff that other people have already said, or if I'm just explaining obvious news, then don't judge me. But of course, correct me if I get anything wrong. The finale of the last movie had a very wrapped up conclusion, but also a good loose end for more movies to be made in the future. Michael overcomes his arc and the conflict with the main characters is settled, but the villain is not quite defeated and the spirits haven't moved on. But even saying that, personally, I don't really see how this story is gonna continue after this first movie, let alone having to integrate the lore of FNAF 2 into this in the format of a sequel. But that's not a bad thing. That actually kind of makes it better, the fact that I can't really predict what's gonna happen next, as long as it's done in a natural way to the end of the first movie. But I really don't mind a surprise. But there are so many different directions that the story can go, and people have made so many interpretations as to what is next. Now, the sound of portraying the FNAF 2 events after the events of FNAF 1 might not sound good on paper, but if you remember back in 2014, right as FNAF 2 was released, there was this giant debate as to whether the game was a prequel or a sequel. And Scott deliberately misled us into thinking that it was going to be a sequel. So the fact of it being a sequel for this movie franchise might not sound good in our heads just because of what we've known and what we've been familiar with for years. But in terms of the theming with FNAF 2 and the way it was introduced to us when the game came out will still work as a sequel. And for you to understand this, I need to go over some pointers for what, in my opinion, make a good sequel. So the first thing is introducing significant characters, locations, and themes. In FNAF 2 the game, we get introduced to characters like the puppet and even the killer, maybe, if you can argue. These characters become extremely important and stay as important characters for the rest of the games. We also get introduced to parts of the story in this universe, like how the FNAF 1 location came to be and which suit the killer used to lure the kids, which actually isn't really introducing anything new, but more like expanding on information we already learned from the first game, which is another step a sequel needs to take. By expanding and naturally evolving from the first film or game, it helps establish a connection and making everything in this world feel like it's just always been here. And FNAF 2 needs to do this. Not only introduce familiar faces that are going to be primary characters for the rest of the story, but they also need to link it back to the themes of the first movie. We need the puppet and Henry to show up. Now obviously Henry wasn't introduced in FNAF 2 the game, but he might as well be introduced in the second movie because in this day and age of FNAF, he's become such a big part of the story, he kinda has to. Kinda like how Afton needed to be introduced in the first movie despite him not being in the actual game. But I've also heard a theory about Mike's kidnapped brother being the puppet, and personally, I don't really like the sound of that theory, but it is a good example of what I'm trying to get across. It links back to the first film, and it might even create a new conflict that could expand from the first conflict in the original film, just as long as it doesn't become a rehash and it doesn't undo his character, you know what I mean? He's grown from the first film and he needs to stay grown. He can't just do the same shtick again. They need to do something new with it. Oh, and on that subject, I also don't want William Afton to return as Springtrap in the second movie, not only because he would make a great villain for the third movie, and he is the villain of the third game, but because it would make a great build up for him and won't overuse or ruin his character. And the second movie we can just use to spend other time on the new animatronics and locations and characters and learning about other parts of the lore before we go back to Afton. I guess you can argue that he's not in the first game, like I said before. Yeah, he's still in the first movie, but he is probably the most significant character in this story, especially when he's like the main villain. So I think introducing him in the first movie is an essential measure. And besides, you can kind of argue that he is a part of the first game. Even though we never see him, he's always there in the background. We learn about the murders, we read about it on the newspapers, and someone had to have done that, so he's always kind of been there. But to be honest, I don't want it to happen. I don't want him to be in the second film, but I'm not going to be surprised if he does show up. Because, I mean, it's Hollywood, they need to make movies, they need to make money, so yeah, I guess. I think that's my video. I don't really know what this was, I just really wanted to... This is a very first draft script. I just wanted to get across some of the things that I really want for this movie. I could really ramble about more, so I might make another video, but only if you guys want to see it. And who knows, maybe I might bring in some other YouTubers to join me and we can all discuss about this together and get a wider opinion on what this second movie should be. But yes, consider this the countdown. One more year. Exactly 1 year, folks, until Five Nights at Freddy's 2 releases. If you guys enjoyed this video, then make sure to leave it a thumbs up. And also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell if you don't want to miss a single upload. I said that in a really weird way.